G'day, I'm Nick Clements from YourQS. Welcome to our podcast, Beyond the Guesstimate, where we explore the concept of cost-informing design. I got involved in the building industry in 1993, and pretty much ever since then I've been frustrated about how inefficient it is and how many opportunities there are to improve. So in my business for the last 20 years, we've been looking to try and find better ways of doing things and constantly looking to improve. Recently I've been reading a book called Exponential Businesses. So it's about businesses that have gone exponential. So there's been the author of the book looked at different ideas and looked at different aspects of those businesses to try and work out what were the characteristics of them that made them successful. And one of the things they talked about was, or one of the things I identified was something called their massive transformative purpose. And that got me thinking about what's my massive transformative purpose been? So why I've been doing this for 20 years now. And I realized that it's about the inefficiencies in the building industry, and in particular around how the design and cost process seems to be disconnected. So when I started back in 1993, we had designers using computers to design, but they would print it out on paper. Back then, there wasn't even USB drives. And so the communication between the designer and other people in the process was by passing paper around. And in our business, where I was involved in Carters back in those days, we were pricing frames and trusses and costing projects. And it was a really time-consuming and slow process. And we also used computers to do it. And one of my early thoughts around this was, surely the designer's computer could talk to our costing computer. Now, 20, 30 years later, I realised that showed more about my lack of knowledge of computers than anything. I really didn't know that much about them back then. And while it seems like a good idea, it was actually really difficult to do and didn't really happen. But what the underlying thing from it, and where I guess my massive transformative purpose came from, was the fact that it was so hard to go from the design to the cost that it really created a lot of disconnects in the process. And it meant that designers didn't really understand the impact of their design decisions until maybe they never did, or it was much later in the process. And what I've seen as the opportunity is looking at to try and bring those two things closer together. So instead of taking ages before the price was known, the impact of those cost decisions can be known really quickly. And so what we've been doing with YourQS is looking to develop technology that allows us to shorten that gap between the design and the costing being understood. So with this podcast, we thought I'd start off with a designer. So we've got Michael Macfie joining us today. So Michael's been around the industry for a while. This is the first time we've met. The first project we worked on, it turns out, was his house, and that was in 2020 that we did an estimate for. And I had a look in our system. We've done about a dozen projects that Michael's designed for a variety of different people, and today we're going to get to know each other.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So welcome, Michael. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your business and sort of how you got into architecture?
Yeah. So business is Macfie Architecture. We're based over in Devonport now. But I actually started it back in 2006, so it's been 18 years I've had it. The first 10 was just myself, just working with myself in the living room kind of thing. And then the last 8 years with the staff, we've got 6 of us in total, including me and my wife.
Right. And you still working out of home, or?
No, we've got a studio in Devonport as well.
Okay, right, yep. Yeah, we started, when I started YourQS, which was 2018, it started with me in my downstairs bedroom, and when we got to 5 people in the downstairs bedroom, I decided it was time to get an office. Yeah. So we've been based
one staff in the house, and then I was like, it's about time.
Yeah. I can remember I was working with quite a big architect on his own house. He owned quite a big practice, so like 100 staff or something. And at that stage, we had no space downstairs, and so he was perched on the end of my couch while I was working on my desk upstairs, and I thought, okay, it's time to get a bit more professional, so get an office. So how does your business work? What sort of customers do you target? What sort of market do you work in?
We haven't really, the last probably 5 years it's been residential renovations, additions. A lot of, we've got into the heritage villa bungalow additions, that's what we're kind of known for. It goes with the market. Like, we've done a lot of new builds as well. I do a lot of new builds down in Queenstown, Wanaka, Christchurch. Not so much in Auckland at the moment, but done a few townhouse developments.
Right. So how do people get to hear about you? How do you find your customers?
Most of it's all referrals and word of mouth from clients, which is good. But I've got a good Instagram and ArchiPro profile, which is generating a lot of new leads.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So I'm interested, so how does your process work? So when you start with a client, you've got a whole bunch of things to establish, a lot of things to work out with them. So typically what's the sort of process you go through when you're working with a new client?
Yeah. So we'd get in touch with, or they'll get in touch with us. We'd arrange a site visit first, just to catch up with them, go through their ideas, get a bit of an overview of what they wanted to do. And in that, they might have an idea of budget then, which is good, but sometimes they have no idea. So it's good just to kind of talk it through and see what extent, like a lot of the recent projects have been the bungalow villa renovations. I've done it a lot over the years. We kind of know a price point of the last couple of years, So if they say they've got a $800,000 budget, it's like, well, you can do this much of that. If you've only got 200,000, it's like, well, stick to just internal renovations. And then, so from that first meeting, we kind of try together if they've got what their budget is, and we can work from there.
Yeah.
And then we'll do the next stage is to do the concept. So we'll do a concept design based normally on their grand plan, get everything in it. And then from there, if we have no idea what the price is, then that's where you come in. So just to see if we're on the right track, if they get the initial concept, the initial price of the concept or the estimate, then we can look at scaling it back, or if there's wiggle room, add more.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's really good, like in that concept phase, to get the initial pricing and give them some peace of mind before going into the full detailed design, which is the more expensive part of the architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I've always said to people the sooner they get the bad news, the better, because then they can deal with it and make decisions. And earlier in the process, whether you're on track or off track, you can deal with it. Whereas we've had a few in the past where they've been like right through to consented drawings. I remember one in I actually remember a couple. There was one in Tauranga where the builder came to us and said, the client really loves this design, and their budget's $400K, and we worked it out and it was 1.3 million. So I'm not surprised they really loved it, because for $400K thinking they were going to get that. So fortunately we got too many.
That's what we want to avoid, getting to that stage.
Yeah.
And you had to be the bad guy at the start sometimes, and people come and say, we've got a $300,000 budget, we want to do a massive extension, and say maybe 10 years ago that would have been okay. So I'm interested in that really early stage, because by the time we're getting involved, you've got some concepts, you've already invested some time and their money in it, and they're somewhat invested in the design. So to some degree, it's almost a bit too late by the time you're starting to get numbers. So I'm interested in how you sort of figure out just what your starting point is and what you think you're going to achieve for whatever dollars they've said they're going to put up. Yeah, so we'd try to get that initial budget off them before we get started, just so we know we're not going to waste any time, doing a concept for something that they're never going to be able to afford. But it's just getting the initial QS estimate is to make sure it's within that budget.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of.
So for that sort of pre the QS estimate bit of it, do you have any methodology, or is it just purely your experience as to what you think you can achieve?
At the moment it's basically just experience. Like the prices have gone up, as you know, so much in the last 5 years. Before that, you could give a pretty good estimate on the classic square meter costing. Now even that's gone up so much. But we've done so many similar bungalow villa renovations. We can kind of know how much the end cost was of that. And say, okay, this one here costs 1 million. This one here costs 1.5. So if you're gauging,
you've got an idea that they did about this sort of amount of stuff for that sort of amount of money. That's going to be the ballpark you're in.
And it's when it's getting a bit different than what we've done before. Then we're like, well, here's my guess, but we need to definitely get a QS just to have a look at it.
And are there any things in particular that you tend to find blows the cost out? Are there any sort of particular design aspects or the way clients approach things or whatever that end up with a scarier outcome?
I guess with the renovations, it's a lot easier with a new build, obviously. With you can do a basic square meter costing if you know their style, what kind of spec they're going to do. But with the renovation, especially old villas, bungalows, it's how much they're going to touch of the existing, which is the unknown. It's the main change, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
It's like you say you're going to do an extension, but then really they're going to paint the rest of it. They might even strip the lining, put insulation in it, which is a big extra cost that we might not have talked about at the start.
Yeah, we get that quite a bit. And that's one of the things we spend with renovations, spend quite a bit of time on trying to establish the scope at the beginning. And obviously the new stuff's relatively easy to identify because we look at the existing drawing, look at the new one, what's changed. But if they're redoing existing areas is something that we realised early on that we needed to make sure we flushed out to know, okay, what are you doing in the existing bedrooms? Are you, like I say, relining, putting new carpet in, painting them, or you're not touching them?
And it's something we
on
don't,
the drawings, it doesn't say.
Something we don't know as well until we get further through. So it's like, But that insulation, double glazing things that definitely cutting into the old roofs. So recently, if people are trying to keep to that low budget, so if we can keep away from touching the old house, because that's when the unknown, you don't know how much you're going to have to replace, how much you're going to, whereas if you can keep it all separate, it's a lot easier to keep within that budget.
So how do you establish what your fee is going to be for a project when it seems to be there's a lot of unknowns and it's sort of quite early? So how do you work out what you're going to charge? Because I guess like us, you're effectively selling your time. Yeah.
So we probably a bit different than other architects we just try to do a fixed price for concept. It's all within reason as well. We'd allow for 2 to 3 revisions in a concept. So normally we'd present the first, they'd come back with a few tweaks, we'd do another one, and then hopefully they're happy then, and then it'd be going after QS, and then we're more than happy to kind of change it, tweak it back if we need to, because it's just helping them out. And then if it gets, sometimes they might change their mind 3 or 4 times, then it becomes an hourly rate after that. And then once I've got the concept nailed down, I can do a pretty good costing for the developed design, know exactly what we're doing.
And just that, from a business side of things, how do you handle your payment terms? So how do you deal with getting the money out of clients?
Concept is we just do a 50% deposit and 50% at the end.
Right.
And then developed is normally a third deposit, third progress, third before it goes to council, and then we handle it all to the getting consenting, and then we hand it over to the builder, project manager to build it, but would still be available for site queries and depending on how much they want to get us involved. We've got a few projects that would do site monitoring, but we can't do it on all of them.
Too time consuming.
And no one really wants to pay for someone else to be there. It's quite good. We've got a lot of projects around Devonport, so we normally just throw that in because I'll be driving past, or if there's any projects that I'm kind of in the area anyway, it's no stress to drop by.
How do you find council to deal with? You obviously hear lots of stories about council. I guess there's lots of variety of experiences from people, but what's your sort of general feel?
More often it's good. You can always be better. I'm finding a lot of if you get a senior member assessing it, it's a lot easier to deal with. There's obviously a lot of juniors that are trying to classic tick the box. So it's definitely has its moments. The one thing on site at the moment we're finding a bit hard is the variations, which especially with additions and renovations is always going to be site variations. So previously you'd normally be able to do minor variations, which is quite easy. You do it with the inspector on site, but now we're finding the triggering a full amendment, which I'm not sure why that has been the last year. So it's quite annoying for everyone involved, because the amendment goes back to council. It's mainly the time delays because it puts a stop on any inspections.
Right.
And then obviously costs the client another lodgement fee. And So we try to avoid the amendments if you can. But
so a full amendment means you've got to do drawings related to that amendment and submit documents.
It means submitting it again to council. It's not a new consent, but
almost.
It's just the delays. So hopefully council can sort out something a bit more streamlined there.
And it sounds pretty frustrating. So in terms of the inspections then, does that hold up all inspections or just inspections related to the particular bit that might be under the amendment?
Normally just that particular bit, but then if it's just a single level addition, then it's quite hard to get it. Most of the time they're nice and allow them to do a partial and carry on.
Yeah.
It's only a few times that it gets a proper stop works and delays things.
Yeah. And so in terms of the projects you're involved with, how much do you get to experience sort of the end result of the project? So
most of the time, yeah.
Okay. So you get to be involved
and we
for
do.
it. And
we recommend builders that we know and work with as a preferred option, because then it's a lot easier if you just pick up the phone with a question rather than...
Yeah.
So, if we're dealing with builders that we know, we're always stopping by and turn up for the roof shout. And
Yeah.
And then, at the end, we're always trying to take the end photos and meet the client at the end.
Yeah.
I've got a big backlog since we used to be more on top of it, but COVID obviously delayed getting photos and finished projects, and everyone was taking longer to finish up. So I've got a fair bit to work through.
So you try and get some pictures and so on of the completed jobs. Yeah.
That's a big thing for us now, is just working on our portfolio, getting the final photos and
So what would be a sort of typical fee range for the types of projects you work with? If you're willing to say,
I mean, depends on the complexity. Like if it's multiple cladding, if it's a simple villa, weatherboards, it's just less junctions for us to draw. So we've got to think about that when we're pricing it.
Right.
If you're doing probably the modern townhouse developments are a lot more work for us, because there's fire rating, there's different cladding, there's different roofing types, junctions. Whereas if you keep it simple, there's a lot less to draw up.
Certainly we've seen it a lot, where a lot of those sort of modern dwellings have 3, 4, 5 different sorts of claddings. And I guess from your point of view, it does add a lot of details to put. And for us, obviously, it takes a bit more time costing them. And from a construction point of view, all of those junctions between those claddings all cost money.
Yeah. But like for us, I try to recommend just keeping to 1 or 2. It's a nice design. Getting 2 more is just you're getting into the Hobsonville Point kind of design style.
I don't have much creative. That's, I guess, why I've ended up being a QS. But you do it when you see something that looks really nice. Like for me, I know it looks nice, but it's hard for me to tell why it looks nice, and sort of how to get it from what doesn't look nice to being looking nice. And I guess that's why we have creatives like yourself involved in.
And it's different for every. Like I said, we do a lot of work down in Queenstown, Wanaka, which down there we'd be using a lot more cedar and schist and that kind of thing, which we wouldn't really do in Auckland.
Right.
Auckland's more classic for weatherboard, and we're doing a lot more kind of aluminium cladding as well.
We've been seeing a fair bit of that. So how did you end up doing stuff in Queenstown, Wanaka?
My parents moved down there.
Right.
Yeah. So they moved down probably 20 years ago now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were they just telling all their mates about you?
Slowly, yeah. So just we go down there quite a lot, and know a lot of builders down there. So.
Right. Yeah. So do you tend to work with, which way around does it go? Do you introduce work to the builders, or do the builders introduce clients to you?
It goes both ways. So we normally look after each other. Like sometimes it goes through the builder. If they've, if one of their friends or families used the builder before, they'd ask them first, and then get a recommendation of a designer first.
Yeah.
And then it's probably half. Yeah. It's either normally the builder or the designer that gets the referral.
Yeah.
But it's nice, if we get a lot of referrals from the builder, we're obviously going to look after them as well.
Yeah. It's always a good relationship. Yeah, we work mostly with builders. We work with about 300 around the country.
Oh, wow.
And probably I've never actually added up how many designers we've worked with, but I guess a similar sort of number. So quite a few.
Well, just like not just recently, but more recently, we've been trying to push the QS, just because we've found that clients are wanting to get 3 or 4 different builders to price it. And then just wasting a lot of time, and they're normally going to the same trades to get prices anyway.
Because it's the same area or same location.
And then, like you said, we use you for our own renovation just because we didn't want to waste our builders' time. We need to get a estimate for the banks and for our own peace of mind.
Yeah.
So we paid for that, and then you can give it to the builder. Say, this is our estimate. Hopefully we can keep within that.
Yeah. I don't know whether I want to ask or not, but how did it pan out?
I mean, that was more our fault, being the clients that are our own worst enemy, adding a lot of extra to the scope. But I think overall, what was initially estimated would have been about right.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's something a lot of people ask us sort of how accurate are you, and it's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah, it must be the more information we can give you, obviously.
Yeah. And it's sort of, and what you described, with it changing afterward, through the project is very much part of the problem for us. So there's a couple of problems we have. One is we do an estimate for a builder. We often don't even know whether the builder's won the job or not. So we don't know whether it's gone ahead with them or even if the client's gone ahead. Like, it's not uncommon for the client to decide not to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And then it can be a couple of years from when we've done the estimate to when the job's finished.
And then the estimate's not valid anymore.
Yeah. And then they've changed stuff on the way through. So we did do an exercise when I first started, when we were sort of trying to dial all our pricing in. We got a student in and took about 3 months, and they looked at 3 projects. And what we did was, rather than having to wait the 2 years or whatever it was until they were finished, we worked with a builder that had finished 3 projects, and they were pretty thorough in capturing all of their costs. And so we got them to give us the actual costs for what they had, the drawings they had at the beginning, and we did an estimate off those drawings, and then the student reconcile what the costs were versus what our original estimate was to then try and identify. So it sort of allowed us to do it within a reasonable period of time, but it still took, we had 800 hours? Yeah, I think it was 800 hours for the student available to do it, and we managed to do 3 projects. No, it was 400 hours, that's right, 400 hours, and it took pretty much all of that 400 hours to analyse those 3 projects. So
how different was it?
8% was what it came out to.
Okay, that's what you're normally kind of saying.
Yeah. So I was it was the sort of answer I was happy with. Yeah. and that was that would have been 4 or 5 years ago, and we've learnt an enormous amount since then. So I'd like to think we've got better over the time. So I'd like to think we've been able to identify more of the issues. But to me, it shows really how hard it is to keep track of what's actually happened, and so it's so dynamic a building project that it's
Even us with getting it priced in the concept phase, it might not actually get built for another year or year and a half, which, I mean, hopefully it's stabilised a bit more now, but the last 2 years it's been
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've been going, started in 2018 and went into the market about 2019. So we've been doing a sort of reasonable volume since about 2019. And up until 2020, the COVID times, keeping an eye on the prices wasn't that big a deal. We've set up, we've got an account at Placemakers, and we download our price. We got it set up with like a small builder discount rate on it. So it's probably, most builders should buy a little bit better than what we got. And so we download that and update it. And I'd do it maybe once every 6 months or once a year, and then just keep an eye on the quotes and stuff that were coming in, and we just tweak things as we went along. And that was fine for a few years.
Yeah.
And then COVID, it was just crazy. And we ended up almost having to dedicate a person just to keep on top of pricing. It was just so rapid.
And that was when, noticed the builders just couldn't do any fixed price. Was just
where you get a quote from a merchant for cedar was probably the worst, and it'd be 7 days the validity on it. So that's not even a quote really. And they'd only quote on what they had in stock. So it was made it really challenging. And so it was a lot of work for us. We ended up building quite a few more systems to try and make the whole price maintenance thing easier.
Or forecast how much it's going to go up in the next.
And we'd collate all of the notifications coming through from the suppliers, and we'd maybe every 2 months do an update, and we'd look at what are all the notifications coming, and then try and, if they might say, LVL is going to be going up between 8 and 12%, so we'd say, okay, we'll stick it up by 10 and take a punt, so at least we were sort of pricing forward. And that helped, but we still had a few builders beefing at us where things caught us out. Cedar was that was a really bad. We had a few projects got burnt quite badly on that.
Yeah.
But it's gone back to what life was like. So the last sort of year, it's been pretty stable. So it's definitely, none of us necessarily made life easier, but it's one set of issues you don't have to worry about quite as much as what we used to.
Yeah.
But you think back in the days, I'm involved in the Institute of Quantity Surveyors, and we were having discussions about price escalation clauses and that sort of thing. And inflation pretty much was under control through my whole working career. So I didn't really, at the very beginning of it in the 80s, I sort of had a bit of experience with it. But most people working in the industry now haven't experienced the inflation like what it was in the sort of late 70s and 80s, where there was the contracts dealt with price escalation, there was mechanisms how to do it, everybody sort of knew what the rules were, and so we were having to relearn all of that sort of stuff through that time period. So it was a challenging time for the industry as a whole.
I guess that's when you're doing the QS for the big development projects.
Yeah, we were working at that stage where the one in particular was a group builder we were doing work for. So we mostly work for sort of smaller design and build type stuff, but there was one group builder so there's quite a big volume. They had sort of 80 houses on the go, and we were having to reprice them because they were taking ages to get the titles through on the section. So they'd sign the contract, and back then people were happy to sign up on stuff because you just couldn't get your hands on houses. And so they'd be signing on these titles that might take a year or 18 months to come through. And then we're having to reprice the houses, maybe a couple of times through that. And then they were renegotiating the contracts with the price increases. So it was, tough time. Unfortunately, that one, they ultimately went bust. That whole new build land and package market died probably the end of 2022. And so if you've seen the consent, you probably would have seen the consent graphs. So for us, they dropped about 18 months ago. And that was about when that business started getting into trouble. And so we stopped working with them a couple of years ago. Yeah. And they went, it was earlier this year, they disappeared. So it was pretty challenging times. And
no, I've definitely seen it getting a lot busier in the last 6 months.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we had an economist speak at a conference a couple of months ago, and that showed that graph, and that I sort of knew that was what happened with the consents, but what he also showed was what was happening with completions, and that was a bit of a surprise to me, as completions was following the same curve, but it was about 18 months later. So what we're seeing is completions are only sort of mid-dive at the moment. So the dive that we saw, and probably the same for you, 18 months ago, that the building market is actually only just starting to see that now. So that's why there's a bit of grumbling around from builders and sub-trades, because they're only just starting to see the impact of what we saw sort of 18 months ago. And what was a bit scary is the forecasts were fairly pessimistic for another couple of years. So basically, pretty much what we've seen in the last year or 18 months has been flat, and they're saying it's like another year to 2 years of being pretty flat. They weren't forecasting the interest rate drop that we saw, and hopefully another one, so that may be a bit more positive.
It's all like consumer confidence. If you see the interest rate slowly coming down, you're going to be more likely.
We've certainly noticed that the conversations we've been having with builders and designers have been more positive in the last sort of couple of months. So my feel is it's going to be not as bad as it has been, but I don't. It's not going to be the boom for a while.
No. Yet. But the same with most things, it's the cheapest time to build is now.
I think tomorrow.
So it's not really going to get cheaper. So
no, I think you'd be right. And I'd say with the tradies and the like, they're going to be probably more available and more negotiable than maybe they have been.
So it's one, a year or year and a half, 2 years ago, you couldn't even find a builder. So that was the hard thing. Whereas now, for someone that's building, it's a lot easier. Should hopefully get done faster because everyone's available. That keeps costs down.
And one thing people keep asking me, are we going to see prices go down? And my view is no.
No one's really going to be putting prices down unless they have to.
So there may be a little bit, and there may be some short-term deals around while people are trying to get rid of some excess stock or something like that. But I think fundamentally the way prices work is they get built in. And one of the exercises I actually did just out of interest was looked at what's the portion of labour in a house. And I looked at the sort of builder's labour, which is about 20% of a typical sort of build project, but then also looked at what's the labour for the subcontractors. And a lot of subcontractors are quite high. So like painters are 95% labour, there's very little materials. But even electricians and plumbers, it's sort of 50, 60% labour. And so I worked out what's the percentage of the total house is sort of carpenter labour or subcontractor labour, and I reckon it's about 60%. And so if you've got 60% of the house that's labour, unless those staff members are happy to take a wage cut.
Yeah.
It ain't going down, or they suddenly get a whole lot more productive, which is unlikely. So there's a big portion of the house there's just no way that cost's going to move. So so some products might get cheaper, but I think on overall
the labour's a lot more of it. Yeah,
it's gonna keep going up.
Yeah, I have heard that the labour prices have gone up a lot since, but then, cost of living's gone up.
Yeah. That's it, exactly. Yeah. That's inflation. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And we through the whole boom time, we didn't see, so we work with builders and helping them work to set their pricing to their clients and helping them prepare their client bids. We didn't see them increasing their margins a lot. So that would be one thing. If everybody was ramping up their margins, then there's room for that to come down.
Yeah.
But we didn't really see that. The labour rates went up, but the margins didn't particularly change.
Yeah.
Subtrades may be a bit different. I think subtrades, maybe they were a bit more enthusiastic on the pricing back then. So there may be a bit of room for some of the subtrade margins.
What about, have you had much to do with Australian market?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's a lot cheaper to build there, but their labour's more. And so we started there. So when I saw this group builder market sort of starting to go, and I knew that market was going to disappear for us, we actually formed a relationship with an experienced QS in Aussie, who's basically our marketing front end in Aussie. And so we started that at the beginning of last year, and I was sort of hoping it would ramp up to sort of replace what we were losing with the group builder. But yeah, it's slowly built, but it's been a lot slower than what I was hoping. So we've done maybe a couple hundred projects in Australia now. So we're starting to get a feel for it. Yeah.
And I've actually got a project that we're just working on at the moment where we're going through the exercise of building it as a New Zealand house, and then we're costing it as a New Zealand house, and then costing it as an Australian house. Because I now think we're starting to get a good feel of sort of where the differences are and what the cost impacts are.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the story comes from that it's so much cheaper to build in Australia.
So
to be
you're
honest,
not finding it is.
Yeah, it's not what we're seeing. It seems that they're able to build that sort of group builder type house, what we would call group builders here. That they seem to be able to do them a lot cheaper, but we're not really in that market either here or there, so I don't really know why.
And that's just they'll have more people doing more houses doing,
Yeah, I think scale's a big part of it and the end of it. So the market we work in over there is pretty similar to what we do here, is mostly sort of design and build or alterations, and that looks really similar cost-wise to New Zealand, if not more, because like you say, that a lot of the labour rates are higher, and they don't seem to be a whole lot more productive or anything like that. There's a lot of little details that are different, and we have added a lot of cost into different areas. It's not going to be 50% like you hear in the media, but there's, and that's the exercise I want to look at, is just what are those things. So things like cavity battens. So we had the odd house in Australia with cavity battens, but it's pretty rare. So the whole cost of the cavity batten thing they don't do. We have the PF rod and foam and flashings and stuff around the windows, so we spend a lot more time and money around the windows that they don't do. Insulation's a lot lower typically over there, so they don't have insulation in the floors by default. In situ concrete floors, they just put 50 mil of sand and pour the concrete over the top of it. There's no, we typically have 150 or more of hard fill underneath. Scaffolding, they don't tend to, a single story building, they don't tend to scaffold, whereas we pretty much scaffold everything. So there's lots of little things like that. So the exercise we're going to go through is just see how they all add up, what difference it makes.
I guess it's not designing for earthquakes so much over there.
Yeah. There's structurally, I can't say I've really noticed a lot of difference. They do a bit of double brick. You see that occasionally, which you obviously never see here. So just 2 stacks of bricks.
Yeah.
And that seems to be quite acceptable. They call them piers over there, or stumps, the piles. So they have like stacks of bricks as a pile, which you obviously wouldn't have here. So it'd be interesting to see that. That's sort of one of the little background research jobs we've got going, is just to do that comparison. And I'll probably look to write an article about it, and I'll spend a bit of time going through it with our QS guy over there, and just to make sure that sort of what we're saying. But it's been it's most of the time we find that the costs are similar, and occasionally there's a few things that are cheaper. There's a few products that are cheaper, but not. So Jib's not one of them. So Jib's cheaper here, or Jib's comparative here to what it is in Aussie. So that one's not one that you can poke the finger at. Plywood's cheaper over there. That's
they
one.
Can keep the demand up.
Yeah. So I I'm hoping we get to learn more as we sort of grow over there and get to understand it more.
Yeah, nice.
So from a technology point of view then, so what's your background and your story with sort of, as you got into architecture, presumably you started off on computers, you wouldn't have started off hand drawing?
No, actually hand drawing, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I started off, my dad had a joinery and building company.
Okay.
So I started, how old, like 13, just doing did all the hand sketches for joinery and all that.
Yeah.
And then, just carried on from there. Started up my own business when I was 20,
Right.
19,
okay.
I think.
Okay. Where did you go after your hand drawing? You're obviously on computers now. So
that's when we went to Vectorworks.
Right.
That was the kind of more cost-effective one to get into.
Yeah.
I think my dad's still got the 1999 version or something. Still going strong.
Yeah. And you were talking before, you're on Revit now. So how long ago did you make the change to
Only it's probably 4 or 5 years actually. I think it's 3, but
yeah, right.
Yeah. This was a staff move really. They were sick of working with Vector. Don't tell them that. But then we had both ArchiPro and ArchiCAD and Revit in and just kind of compared them both. And mainly the rendering. You got to get an external program with Revit, but
with ArchiCAD or Revit.
With Revit.
Okay.
But it's a lot better than
great.
ArchiCAD.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we can do some really good concept designs and 3D walkthroughs.
Right.
Yeah. And then it's good to know that you guys use it as well, so we can
give
you the model.
Yeah. Also, something we've been working on. We've released it, but haven't really pushed it. But it's going to be high on the priority list next year as we've developed add-ons for both Revit or plugins, depending on which language you use, for both Revit and ArchiCAD. And what it allows the designer to do is basically export the model in a format that we can import straight into our system. So whatever we've been doing till now,
that'll take labour out of it. So hopefully,
at this stage, it's sort of similar. Like it's very early development for us, so we're learning what we need to do, and we're just about to release the second version of the plugin. So we've improved some things there to make it a bit more efficient for the designer and clean things up a bit more when it comes through for us. So at the moment, it's been a bit break even between what we've been doing previously, which is basically taking the PDFs and then creating the 3D model by hand over the top of it. So now it's sort of similar. The main benefit is it's more accurate because we are working off a PDF that's 1 to 100 scale, and we are clicking on it, and you only have to be a couple of pixels out, and that's a couple hundred mil, and it can actually add up across the drawing. Whereas if we're importing the model in, it comes in millimeter accurate. So that's sort of at this point been the main driver is just trying to improve the accuracy, but we're working on better, improving the tools and improving. Now we're sort of learning, because a lot of these things you come up with an idea and think, what if I could do this? And you try it and you okay, that didn't quite work how I expected. And you're basically iterating until you get to a point where you actually end up with something that works really well. And so we're sort of still in that iteration phase with it. But the next one we've got, which my developers are working on at the moment, will, I think, get to the point where it should be more efficient for us to actually have the imported model and doing it ourselves. So that's a good step forward.
Yeah.
We still end up doing quite a lot of modelling work because there's a lot of things. So we basically drive everything for the costing off the 3D model. So we model everything with the excavation, the site security fence, the silt fence, the scaffolding, the whole lot. So whereas you wouldn't be modelling them because you don't typically have them on the drawing. And so even if we're able to import your model and make full use of it, we're still going to be doing quite a bit of modelling over the top of it to address all. And
especially the concept design wouldn't really have all that detail in it.
No.
Bit of guesswork for you guys.
Yeah. So we've got to make assumptions about a lot of that sort of stuff. And then the other one that we've got to work through. Sorry, my phone's buzzing. That we've got to work through is. We call them zones, and I think ArchiCAD calls them zones. I think Revit calls them rooms. Is basically the inside of the room. So where you've got a wall, the wall might go past a number of rooms and be the same wall type across those number of rooms, but the room linings might change, and so you can't easily have the wall linings off the wall. You've got to have another concept. So we place a zone inside each room, and that zone tells us what the linings are for the walls, what the floor covering is, what the ceiling is, and we place those. And we haven't come across a lot of designers using zones or rooms in Revit or ArchiCAD, and so we've got to figure through when we start looking, really trying to integrate the design models of sort of what's the most efficient way of using that, because if there isn't benefit for you putting a zone or a room in, then there's no point in you doing a whole lot of work just for us. So we need to come up with a solution for doing that. So there's a number of things like that. We've still got a lot of ideas and a lot of areas to work through before we can really get it to the point that we want to get it to.
Probably good to be like thinking forward especially for the concept and for renovations, a bit of a client checklist as well, just to see what they're expecting.
Yeah.
Because quite often they wouldn't know if they get a bit more of a few questions of what they're expecting, like full paint. Taking skirtings off. Yeah. Sanding,
Yeah. Are you relining or not?
Yeah.
So, and we do that. We try and address that during our fee proposal stage. So what we try and do is review the information we've received, which often is just a drawing, and basically then work out off that, okay, what's the scope of work? And we'll say if it's a renovation, is the repainting just the affected area? So if you're changing one wall in a room, then just painting that wall, or is it the whole room, or is it the whole house?
Yeah, exactly.
So we do that. If we don't get told it, we try and flush that out through the sort of fee proposal process.
Yeah. Like you say, it's probably better to allow for it and tell them than not allow for it and get pulled up later.
Yeah, that's sort of a challenge for a QS is we've got to try and, if we're too low, then the builder's going to lose money or not be happy, or somebody's got a nasty surprise at the end of the project. But if we're too high, so if you put in every contingency and made every assumption, it's going to be too high and the clients may not go ahead because it's going to be unaffordable. So we've got to try and walk the line between what's a realistic set of assumptions as to what might happen, particularly if they haven't given us a detailed set of scope. And even when we're looking at, say, a renovation in terms of the amount of work involved in it, we've got to try and walk that line to, we try and say, okay, we want to get it right. And so it can't be too high, it can't be too low. But,
obviously you got to, I think on the last thing you sent through, there was, what kind of scope, what kind of spec, obviously if it's a villa, it's going to have a lot more expensive skirtings than a standard 1950s or something.
Yeah, that's something we do. So with things where the client choice is the main cost driver, so things like door handles or toilet fittings or kitchens, on a drawing it looks exactly the same. You can't tell whether they're going to spend $25 on a door handle or 150. And so what we try and do with that is we've got, for most things, I've got the three selections, so basic, standard, premium, and all it does is just changes the amount of the allowance for it to try and accommodate that. And then I can't remember whether we've talked to you about it or not. Something we've done, we've created a concept that we call complexity, and so it's a subjective factor we can apply. And because where we struck it was, particularly with, say, the villa renos that you get involved with, is they're likely to be more labour and more difficult than say, a 50s or a 70s or a 90s house. And so what we came up with is a concept where we can set it on a scale, starting at 1 and basically going up from there. And it increases the labour times for the sort of key trades, so the carpenter, plumber, painter. And so as the building gets more complex, it adds on more setup time and more a complexity factor to try and compensate for the fact that not every building is exactly the same. Whereas previously we were basically treating everything as if it was the same construction.
As a new build or something.
And 95% of the time it was fine. There's probably only 5%, and that 5% would be sort of villa renos or much older houses or houses in really poor condition or high-end architectural stuff. They were the ones where we get grumbling because it was we were too low. And so this complexity factor allows us a bit of subjectivity to try and adjust for that without, because the traditional QS is, it would be somebody with experience looking at it and thinking, oh, it's going to be this much, and we try and avoid doing that. So basically, we try and build everything, all our information and knowledge about how the building's constructed is built into our software. So our guys, their role is to get the model right and get the settings right on the model, and then they push a button and it calculates it out. So I don't have people looking at it thinking, oh, it should take this long. So we're trying to, unlike you, be as little creative as we can in what we do. Make it as sort of rigorous and repeatable as we possibly can. I thought what I might do is just you've seen the result of what we do, but you've not really seen how we work. So I've actually opened up your house in our software, and Pete, our magician who runs this thing, should be able to flip over to my screen. And unfortunately, I forgot to bring my mouse, so I'm going to be driving off my mouse pad, so it might be a bit clunky at different times. So This is our 3D modelling tool, and so we developed this from scratch with the whole idea of using it to drive the costing process. So on the left-hand side, we've got what we call template elements. So this is a library of things that you use to build buildings. And then on the right-hand side is all of the elements that have been placed in this particular model. And we've got a concept that we call work areas and scopes. And as we build the model, we allocate bits of the parts of the model to those different scopes. So you can see this is the sort of establishment stuff, so the demolition, site works, and the like. I always like looking at the exterior walls because that's a good one. So what I can do is pick a scope and say show, and then it restricts the view to just what's in that scope. And so typically the guys will be starting off in a 2D view, and they'll pick an element. So if we're putting in walls, so we go say exterior walls, and I'll just place one randomly over here. They just basically click around the drawing and it drops in a wall like that. And then if I flip to the 3D view, you can see that it's placed those walls in. So what my guys are doing is working their way through the building, modelling it like that.
Yeah. Redrawing.
Yeah, effectively. And so you see why. So
having the Revit model would be.
Yeah. So if you go back far enough, so when we first started on this, the whole idea was just utilising the model from the architects, and we didn't think we were going to build this at all, and we thought we'd be able to use the model. But what we found over time was there's a whole bunch of issues around that. Is the model may not necessarily be modelled well enough to be able to be used, and then a lot of builders don't have the relationship with the architect to be able to get the model, so there was a whole bunch of issues. So we realised we were going to need to develop a tool to be able to do the modelling ourselves. So that's what we created. And then when I got YourQS going, we just basically concentrated on using the tool. But as the business grew, I realised that we were spending so much of our time creating the 3D model that I knew already existed in most of the cases. That's sort of what got me back into say, okay, well, our original idea that we were working on years ago was actually pretty good. And so hence we've been working on those plugins. So that's the idea, is that it'll save us having to do all of this. So this is the report that we generate from the system. And so what the guys do is take a bit of a screenshot of the work. We try and take one that's sort of an overall one just to give a feel for the project. So you'll recognise this is what you did on your extension or what you were planning on doing at that point. Yeah. If we scroll down to here, this is the contents. What we've built into the reports is hyperlinks. So as you click on each of those, you can jump around the report. And then on the side here, it uses what the PDF tools call bookmarks. And so the same structure is on the side. So you can basically navigate around the report either way. If we go to the summary, it gives you a high-level view. So these are what we call work areas. And so if we go back to the model, that relates to this structure here. So this is built by my guys as they're assembling the model. They basically break it into that structure. The reason why we came up with that was when we first started promoting YourQS, and we had the system of being able to create the 3D model and drive the costing from it. It just gave like a big lump of data, and when we presented it to builders, we were saying, "Oh, it's great. These costs have been generated from the 3D model. They're right." And the builder would say, "Well, how do I know? I can't understand what you've allowed for." And so I sort of thought about it and thought, "Well, I know it's good because we've got this 3D model behind it. How do we communicate what we've got in the system?" So I came up with this report design, and we came up with this concept of work areas and scopes. So that was a work area I clicked on. These are scopes. And so as I click into each one of them, what we do now is we take a screenshot of what's in that scope. So these are all the elements that make up that scope. And then in the new report, what it does is creates this table to show the properties on the elements. So previously our guys manually basically ticked a box to say, put a note on the element to say what settings were made on it. What the system does now is automatically generate a schedule. So this has actually got a bit of a mixture of both. So this is how we used to do it in the old days. So because we used your old house, which was done a few years ago, it's got a mixture of both sets of notes. So in the old days, we used to manually put notes. Now it's automatically generated from the system. So it doesn't rely on the user remembering to do it, and it gives you a bit more information. And so this is what we call a detail report. So it's what we would give to the builder for them to be able to check through. Yeah. There's navigation to be able to jump around. So if I jump back, I can jump back to the contents, go back to the summary, and we'll go to that same exterior walls view. So you can see that it looks exactly the same as what we had in the model. walls, we give the schedule of all of the individual windows. So that's something that people wanted to know was exactly what we've allowed for. So it gives a schedule of the window types and then the instances. So where there's different sized lintels or if it's a bit of an Australian thing, the fly screens, that they have lots of fly screens over there.
Yeah.
So it basically then tells you what lintels are allowed for, what fly screens are allowed for, and so on. Here's the overall summary for the wall. So in this case is cedar on your house, and it was 38 square metres of it, and this is the insulation that was in it. And all of that's generated automatically out of the model now. And then below is a complete breakdown of all of the labour, materials. So the idea being that a builder can look at this, the picture gives them a visual idea of what's been allowed for, the little schedule gives them a bit more detail of what we've allowed, so you can pick up maybe if the insulation's got the wrong rating on it or whatever, and then this allows them to check through labour, materials, subcontractors and the like. So that's the sort of latest we've been doing with the reports, and we're just continuing to sort of work away and refine them. A couple of things we've added into it is this trade summary. And so what it does, I'll get my scroll going, is we've introduced the idea of being able to do a calculation of cost per square metre. I've never been a fan of cost per square metre, anybody that sort of talked to me about it. But I realise, it's not a good way of pricing, but it is. And it's probably my Aussie guys with their experience sort of convinced me that it's quite a good way of cross-checking. So basically being able to look down a set of square metre rates does give you a feel for whether something's a load of rubbish or not. So if you see $10,000 in there, immediately start looking at it. So I did introduce it. So what we do is we add something into the model that we call affected area. So if I go to, and we stick it into the last scope, the overheads one. So I'll show that. And we see these blue areas here are what we call affected area. And so for renovation, it's a bit subjective as to sort of exactly what's included or not, but it basically gives us a set of square metres we can work on. And then we basically then each of the trades we're able to break out by a square metre rate for each of those areas. So it is actually quite a good cross-checking tool. And then it gives you this number at the bottom, which 10 grand for a renovation is not unrealistic. It seems like a big number, but often renovations have a whole lot of work that doesn't actually add floor area, and so it adds to the cost, but doesn't add to the divisor underneath it. So it means you end up with a big number. Yeah. And a lot of our builders give us quotes. So what this also does is if they've got quotes from their subbies, then it shows what portion of the job's quoted and what portion's estimated. So they know. A good project would probably be 50-50 quoted and 50-50 estimated. So it means from a builder's point of view, they've got a good chunk of it locked in. Yeah. But we've developed this summary just to help them understand sort of where it sits overall. So that's some of the new stuff we've been working on in our reports.
Yeah, nice.
So thanks for joining us on our podcast, Beyond the Guesstimate. I'm Nick from YourQS. If you want to work with a QS that really knows what they're doing and you want to look to improve your business, then give us a yell. Check out our website, yourqs.co.nz.